So you've sent us, well, a whole bunch of UN documents about this recent Summit of the Future thing.
Right.
Looks like you're trying to make sense of this Pact for the Future and figure out why it matters, I guess.
Hey, the big one.
Well, get ready, because we're really going to dive into this thing. All the speeches, everything.
You know, it's interesting, even just skimming through it, the sense of urgency is palpable.
Yeah.
The Secretary General's opening remarks, well, it's not the usual diplomatic song and dance.
Okay.
He is talking about, like, a chaotic free-for-all in space.
Wow.
Says we need to completely change how we govern the world.
Really?
It sets a certain tone.
Yeah, he's not messing around.
No.
It's like he took one look at everything happening and said, all right, everyone, enough with the chit-chat. We got to do something.
Exactly. And you know what's really interesting? This wasn't just a bunch of world leaders huddled in a room, you know, making decisions.
Oh, okay.
1.5 million people were involved in the lead up to this summit.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's unprecedented.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to this feeling globally that, yeah, things have got to change, and they need to change now.
1.5 million voices. That's incredible. It makes you wonder, how do you even process all of that feedback and turn it into, well, what exactly did they agree on? There were multiple documents.
Yeah. It's like a 3-course meal of goals.
Okay.
The main course, the big one, is this Pact for the Future.
Right.
But you've also got this global digital compact on the side, all about how we handle our digital lives responsibly.
Interesting.
And then for dessert, we get a big old slice of philosophy with a declaration on future generations.
So can we do dessert first? I like the way you think. But before we go there, give me the quick version of the Pact itself. Is it just another one of those well-meaning but ultimately kind of useless UN resolutions?
Yeah.
Or is there more to it?
This is not a quick read.
Okay.
It's massive, this thing. But what makes it different, I think, is that it focuses on action. Like, it lays out over 50 specific actions, and they cover everything.
So it's not just about saying these big goals. It's more like, here's what we're actually going to do.
Yeah.
I like that.
Like, for example, they want to triple renewable energy and phase out coal power, which isn't surprising.
Right.
But here's where it gets interesting. They also talk about transitional fuels. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Who benefits from this transition?
Yeah.
That's something we need to look into for sure.
Now, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That kind of detail is what brings these documents to life. We're not just talking about these big ideas, but the nitty gritty of how to make things happen.
Totally. And this focus on real practical action. It's not just about climate change. There's a whole section on peace and security, which, let's be real, that's a big deal right now.
Right.
But what struck me is they're talking about very specific things, like how dangerous it is to use explosive weapons in cities.
Right.
Or protecting journalists in conflict zones. These are really important and really timely concerns.
Absolutely. So from climate change to the global economy to protecting journalists, this pact covers a lot.
It does.
How do you even begin to implement something this big? It always comes back to money, right?
You got it. Financing for this kind of sustainable development, it's the big question.
Right.
The elephant in the room. The pact calls for a complete overhaul of the global financial system, hoping to, free up trillions of dollars.
Wow.
Whether that's even possible is another story.
It's a good question. All right. So we got the stage set, a world in crisis, a call for huge changes, and this plan for action in the form of this pact. But it seems like there are a lot of details to figure out.
Absolutely. And that's where things get interesting. The pact lays out this shared vision.
Yeah.
But the speeches from world leaders, well, they paint a much more complicated picture.
How so?
There are different priorities, concerns, sometimes outright tension.
Okay.
But we'll dive into all of that in a bit.
All right. So we've got this pact for the future, this big plan. But you mentioned every country, they've all got their own agendas, their own perspectives, right?
Yeah.
So it's not exactly like a big, happy UN family gathering.
Not exactly, no. You've hit on something important, though.
Okay.
We can talk about these global agreements all day long.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, it's the individual countries making the decisions.
Right.
And as you can imagine, those decisions, well, they don't always line up perfectly.
So let's hear from some of these world leaders. What were the big issues? Where did they agree? And where did things get a little tense?
Well, one theme that came up a lot was, moving beyond just words and into action.
Okay.
For example, the president of Guyana really stressed this, that the international community needs to shift from ambition to action.
From ambition to action. I like that.
Yeah.
It reminds us we're not just talking about goals, but real people's lives.
Exactly. And he's right to emphasize that.
Yeah.
Because there's this history with these UN things,
Yeah.
Big pronouncements are made. Everyone feels good for a minute, but then nothing.
Right. It fades away.
It's happened before.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure the pact for the future is different?
Good question. So Guyana's calling for action, not just talk. What other themes came up in the speeches?
Well, unsurprisingly, technology was a big one.
Of course. The future. Right.
Right. The Prime Minister of India gave this really interesting speech talking about balancing rapid innovation with, responsible global governance.
Okay.
He said, digital public infrastructure should be a bridge, not a barrier.
A bridge, not a barrier. I like that. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of new technology.
Yeah.
But we have to make sure it's benefiting everyone, not just making the gap between the haves and have-nots even bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this idea of bridging divides came up a lot, especially when it came to global power dynamics.
Okay, so this is where some of that tension comes in.
Yeah.
Give me an example. Where did those power dynamics really become clear?
One very clear example was the debate about reforming the Security Council.
Okay, I can see how that would be a big one.
Right.
I mean, the Security Council, that's like the UN's most powerful body.
Absolutely. And right now, it's mostly controlled by a handful of countries.
Right.
So you can imagine countries who are left out of those decisions.
Yeah.
Especially as the world changes and, those historically less powerful countries are becoming more influential.
It's like having a school board meeting.
Yeah.
Where only the kids from one class get to vote on the rules that everyone has to follow.
That's a great analogy.
It seems a little unfair.
Right. And it highlights that this isn't just about hurt feelings. It's about fairness, representation on the world stage.
Huh.
The representative from Honduras, he actually argued that reform is necessary to make it more democratic in order to reestablish respect for international law and build a new political and economic order that is able to deal with the self-determination of the peoples of the global South.
Strong words. So we have this tension, this ideal of global cooperation.
Right.
But then the reality of how power actually works.
Exactly.
What other big issues came up?
Well, nuclear disarmament, as you might expect.
Right. Always a hot topic.
Right. The president of Iran gave a very passionate speech about, a world free of nuclear weapons. But a lot of leaders also talked about conventional weapons, too.
Okay, the ones that maybe don't have that same, end of the world potential as nukes, but are causing real harm right now.
Exactly. The representative from Trinidad and Tobago brought up the illegal firearms trade and how we need better cooperation to really address that threat.
So again, we have this big picture, these global ideals,
yeah,
but also these real everyday problems that people are dealing with.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that progress, it's not a straight line.
It's messy.
It's messy, yeah. You'd be working on, global nuclear disarmament.
Right.
But also trying to reduce gun violence in a specific city. These things are all connected.
It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet.
Yeah.
While you're also planning a whole bathroom renovation.
How is that?
You've got to do both.
And, speaking of the bigger picture, one speech that really struck me was by the Prime Minister of Armenia. He talked about what he called positive narratives.
Positive narratives.
Yeah, and how important they are for, breaking through these global deadlocks. He said that efforts should be made to see the prerequisites of a good future and think about them, because what happens in reality first happens in our minds.
Wow. That's really interesting. It reminds me of that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. If all we hear is negativity, it's no wonder we feel stuck.
Absolutely. And he wasn't the only one who talked about this.
Mm.
The representative from Bangladesh, he told this really powerful story about a recent movement in his country where 170 million people basically stood up and said, our aspirations for freedom, dignity, justice, and equality are more important than just economic growth.
That's a lot of people.
Right. Mm. And it shows that development, it's not just about numbers, it's about people's actual lives.
Right. And that brings us back to the idea of diverse voices.
Yes.
We can't just have the same people dominating the conversation.
Absolutely.
We need to make space for the perspectives that don't always get heard.
Exactly. And one voice that really highlighted this was the representative from the Bahamas. He gave this incredibly powerful speech about power imbalances in the global economy, how smaller nations, their progress is often stifled by the actions of larger, wealthier countries.
It's like that saying, the rich get richer.
Exactly, right. And it's something we really need to change. If we're serious about this pact for the future, we can't just talk about equality. We have to create systems that actually support it.
Okay, so we've explored the Pact for the Future. We've heard from some of the different voices at the summit, the hopes, the disagreements.
Right.
But there were two other documents you mentioned, the Global Digital Compact and this Declaration on Future Generations. Tell me about those.
So the Global Digital Compacts, this one tackles something we've already talked about a bit, this rapid evolution of technology.
Right.
And how to make sure it benefits all of humanity.
Right, and how to manage it.
Exactly. It's about closing the digital divide, protecting human rights online, thinking about how to govern things like artificial intelligence.
And speaking of shaping the future, the Digital Compact seems to really tackle this head on.
It does.
And it sounds like you've uncovered some interesting details about it. But for now, let's take a quick pause, and we'll come back to discuss it in detail when we return.
Ever wondered how you can elevate your spiritual journey through music? Welcome to Gospel Bites AI, the channel dedicated to enriching your soul with uplifting gospel tunes tailored to your taste. Our collection spans various genres, offering something special for every listener. Picture this. Not only can you enjoy heartfelt songs, but you can also suggest a topic and style, and we'll create a unique track just for you. Imagine sharing these custom songs with your family and filling your home with joy and devotion. Are you ready to transform your worship experience? Join us at Gospel Bites AI and let your spirit soar. Don't miss out. Subscribe now to discover the beauty of personalized gospel music.
Okay, we're back. Before the break, we were talking about the Global Digital Compact, this roadmap for navigating the digital age in a responsible way. What is it about this document that's got you so fascinated?
Well, it gets into some really interesting stuff, especially when you get to artificial intelligence.
Oh, okay.
Remember how we were talking about actually turning these big goals into action?
Yeah.
Well, the Digital Compact actually makes a really specific proposal.
Okay.
They want to create an independent AI panel at the UN.
Wait, an AI panel at the UN?
I know.
That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Right. It just shows you how fast technology is changing and how important it is to have global oversight.
Yeah.
This isn't some far off fantasy anymore. We're talking about AI affecting global peace, security, even, what it means to be human.
Okay, so we're not just talking about making sure robots don't take over the world, although that is an image that comes to mind.
It does.
But what kinds of things would this AI panel actually be doing?
Well, think about it. AI is already used in so many things.
Right.
Healthcare, the military, finance.
Right.
This panel would have to deal with the ethical problems that come with these technologies.
Oh, okay.
Making sure they're being developed and used responsibly. Imagine trying to set global rules for things like autonomous weapons systems.
Wow. Yeah.
Or figuring out data privacy in a world where surveillance is getting more and more advanced. These are big questions.
They are. The fact that they're even thinking about an international panel for this shows you how seriously they're taking it.
Yeah, it really does. It shows they understand that this digital revolution, it's not separate from everything else. It's connected to global politics. The choices we make or don't make about the digital world, they're going to shape every part of our future.
It's a lot to consider. Okay, so we've got the Pact for the Future tackling these huge global problems.
Yeah.
The Digital Compact dealing with the tech revolution.
Right.
And then there's that third document you mentioned.
Yes.
The Declaration on Future Generations. This one, I have to admit, I'm having trouble with it.
I get it.
What do you even do with a document that's supposed to represent people who haven't even been born yet?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to grasp, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like trying to write a letter to someone you haven't met, someone who might not even exist for another 100 years. How do you understand what they need, what they want?
Right. It seems impossible. But I think that's kind of the point.
Oh, okay.
It makes you think outside of your own limited viewpoint. Yeah. And consider the bigger picture.
Long game.
Exactly. And that's what I find interesting about this declaration. It's not about dictating policies. It's about changing our way of thinking, encouraging us to think about the consequences of our actions.
The impact we're having.
Yes. It emphasizes things like sustainability, environmental protection, social justice, peace building.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we're not just borrowing this planet.
We have to take care of it.
Right. For future generations.
So it's less about predicting the future.
Right.
And more about making sure we don't mess things up so badly that there isn't one.
Exactly. It's about intergenerational accountability.
Okay, I like that phrase.
Making sure our decisions today don't come back to haunt future generations.
Right. Trying to leave the world a little better than we found it.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the core of what this whole deep dive is about.
Which is?
You got these incredibly ambitious goals, all these voices from around the world, a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
But the question is, can they turn all this talk into real, meaningful action?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? We can have all the meetings and sign all the agreements we want, but if things don't actually change...
That's the point, right?
Right.
And that's where the real work starts. The Pact for the Future does try to address this.
Okay.
They're talking about regular check-ins to see what progress is being made, ways to hold countries accountable for their promises. But, as we've seen, things don't always work out the way they're written down on paper.
So how do we make sure this pact doesn't end up forgotten?
It sounds simple, but I think it starts with staying informed.
Okay.
You've already done that by, digging into these documents with us.
Right.
But keep learning. Keep asking those questions. Don't let this be just another news story that people forget about.
Yeah, keep the conversation going.
Exactly. Talk to your friends and family about it. Let your elected officials know that this matters to you. Support organizations that are working to make a difference.
So connect the global to the local. Even though these issues are huge, our actions still matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate the power of individual action. Even small changes to how we live can add up.
Right.
Support companies that care about sustainability. Reduce your own impact. Speak up when you see injustice.
Think globally. Act locally.
Exactly. And remember, this Pact for the Future, it's not an ending. It's a beginning. It's a starting point for dialogue and for working together. The future is not set in stone. It's something we create together.
And on that note, we'll leave you with that thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Summit of the Future.